This is all theory, right? And hacking Mars rover doesn't have anything to do with seeing the Mars rover or seeing Mars, right? That really doesn't matter. What's most important to guys here and girls here and the men and women in the audience really has to do with the theory of hacking, right? The number one thing that I need to get across is how this is vulnerable and why, okay? And none of my slides actually matter. What matters is the theory. So the number one thing I want to talk about is that code is a puzzle, right? So let's just kind of go around and see what everybody is doing, right? We've got a lot of people sitting here today. We can all kind of consider ourselves pieces of the puzzle, right? And what I mean by that is we're all sitting together learning about computer security and the issues related to computer security. But not a single person in here can solve the world's problems. I've been hacking since 1999, and back in the day, we used to be able to solve problems as a particular individual, but that's no longer true. Systems today are so complex that it no longer matters, right? A single individual is capable of a piece of a puzzle, right? Solving a piece of the puzzle. But the overall complex system, it's just not possible for one person to do it anymore. So we have to work as a team. Everybody in the audience has to work as a team. Every girl, boy, man, woman has to work as a team. And really, that's what components are about today, right? The Mars rover itself is composed of what? Somebody throw out some names. What do you got? Anybody? Right, what else?
Rubber.
Sorry?
Rubber.
Rubber. Yes, what else? Motors. Thank you. Anything else? Young man. Sorry? Yes. We've got so many different pieces. No, I gotcha. Yeah, the jet engine that helped it actually land. Brilliance, right? So we have a ton of different pieces that make the Mars rover work. Oh, the young man's right. There were two engines, one that helped it take off and one that helped it land. Right? So now we have two engines. And there are so many different things. Yeah, there's so many things involved in just getting the jets to work. Right? So now you're talking about a massive amount of components or puzzle pieces that make something work. Right? And that's really the exciting thing about modern technology. You can find a vulnerability in one tiny thing, whether it's the jet engine, or whether it's a software component or a piece inside a computer. It doesn't really matter if you hack the whole thing. A vulnerability in one tiny component may be good enough, right? So what's cool here about the Mars rover is that we can all work together to find solutions. So now, actually, you know what? This might be more fun. So this may have worked out for the best. Instead of going through the slides that I was going to go through, because it's kind of theory, it's important, but it's boring. We'll get to the exact same point if we work on this together as a team, okay? So how about we work as a group right now and hack the Mars rover? Conceptually, not actually doing that, we don't actually want to hurt Curiosity, but why don't we right now together just work out ways that we could hack the Mars rover, okay? This might be a little bit cooler. So, when everybody was talking about components, they mentioned what? The jets, the treads, the components that use the computer, or build the computer, to run the computer, different machine components, motor components to make it work. All of these things can create a context of risk or vulnerability, right? If you affect the computer, then the Curiosity can't think. If you affect the motor, then it can't move. If you affect the arm, then it can't grab things. If you affect the thrusters, then it can't go anywhere, right? It can't land. So there are a lot of potential risks in all of the various components of the Mars rover. But let's put this into a context very quickly, right? Because all of these things have a risk profile, but how are they practically vulnerable? We can't get to Mars and hack it sitting in front of the rover, right? That means we have to get to it remotely somehow. So somebody out there yell out how we would talk to the Curiosity rover today. Does anybody know? Yes. Facebook. That's actually true. Surprisingly, you can talk to the Mars rover over Facebook. Anybody else have an idea? Wait, we've heard enough out of you, young man. This guy's got so many answers, I love it. Does anybody have a communications-based, yeah? Radio. Brilliant. So we've got Facebook, and we've got radio. And NASA. NASA's a very important point as well, right? So we have at least 3 vectors for communicating with the Mars rover. Facebook is actually a very interesting one, because this is a way that you can get someone else to pass information along to the Mars rover, or to bring information back from the Mars rover to you, right? So this would be kind of a secondary link, or one extra hop in the network until you get to the Mars rover, right? But the direct links you've got are the radio application and NASA itself. And NASA's going to use the radio link to talk, but NASA has all the communications equipment ready and available. So you could build the infrastructure yourself to talk to the Mars Curiosity rover, and it would probably cost you a lot of money, right? As in time, components that you need to build, the antennas, the infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. But what if you could get NASA to do the work for you? And again, Facebook is going to come into play here in a very interesting way. So now we've got a channel, right? We know that we need to get to Curiosity over the radio link from NASA. How do we do that? NASA has a ton of really brilliant engineers, all working to secure Curiosity from people that are trying to do exactly what we're doing. So how would we go about telling them, hey, I want you to send this message to Curiosity that's potentially going to get us some kind of remote code execution on the Mars rover? Anybody have an idea? Anyone? Anyone? Sorry? That's true. The robot doesn't have ideas, but it can be told to do things, right? The best part about the Mars Curiosity rover is that we can channel information through the radio system, but NASA has to communicate with it on a day-to-day basis. It needs to know that NASA's there. It needs to be able to send messages to NASA. It needs to be able to receive messages from NASA. I mean, think about it. This is a robot on another planet that took a selfie and then uploaded it to NASA, and we can see that on Facebook. That's pretty amazing. So think about the link. You've got NASA creating messages, right? They have to format the message in a certain way. Like I'm talking to you now, I'm talking in English, right? There's a language that's spoken from NASA to the rover. They have to package the data in a certain way that's a language representation of the data, and then they send it over the radio to Curiosity, right? Just the same way, Curiosity packages up data in a certain language and sends that information back down to NASA. This is great stuff. This is how we communicate every day, and it's exactly why RenderMan was able to intercept messages from planes. It's just messages being packaged in a certain language and being sent over a radio. The Curiosity rover is absolutely no different from any other system, period. So what's great about this is if we know how to speak the language, we can start talking to Curiosity, even if we don't have the communication equipment ourselves. We can use NASA as a pivot point between ourselves and Curiosity. All we have to do is speak the language. So the number one thing that we can start doing is a little bit of research on Google to find out, how do they send messages back and forth? What kind of content do they send back and forth? Okay? And then what's the one thing that I've already mentioned that Curiosity sends down to us? Anybody? Yeah, pictures, right? It needs to send back soil samples, it needs to send back pictures, and pictures are the most interesting thing, because I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but the number one way that a lot of communication systems have been hacked in the past, including web browsers, email, all kinds of things like that, audio-visual software, is because of image processing. When you render a picture in Facebook or whatever application you have, software has to interpret a very complex set of information to show you a set of pixels that represent a picture, right? Whether that's Curiosity or you or somebody else that you know, it's a very complex series of information. And because it's complex, mistakes can be made when interpreting that information. So if you go online and you look up, JPEG vulnerability, or PNG vulnerability, or GIF vulnerability, there have been a lot of exploits over time written to compromise the way that language is interpreted in the context of images. And that's amazing stuff when you put it in the context of Curiosity. Because now we know a very commonly vulnerable system or series of software components is being used on Curiosity to receive and send messages. So how would we affect that? Think about it from this point of view. This young man up here noted that Facebook is a way to communicate with the Mars Curiosity rover. That was actually genius. The reason why is because images. Imagine that an image can be posted on Facebook and communicated to Curiosity. The NASA team is going to say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we sent some fan photos up to the Mars Curiosity rover? Our fan photos can then exist on Mars on the robot. Now you've got a problem. Because NASA is going to take the image format that you have given them over Facebook, and they're going to provide your pivot point up to the Mars Curiosity rover. When the rover receives the image, it has to be able to understand it. So it's going to process the image. If there's a way that you can exploit the software that processes the image, then you might be able to get code execution on the rover by posting an image on Facebook. That's pretty profound when you think about it, right? That we have a communication system today as worldwide and just incredibly interpersonal as Facebook that can help somebody go to an entirely different planet. That's absolutely unheard of, but in 2014 we can do that. It's amazing to me that we can do that. So what's exciting is you've got the ability to post that image and get it potentially uploaded to the Mars Curiosity rover. And that's kind of where I came into play. I actually had a very similar line of thought. I thought to myself, wouldn't that be amazing if the Mars Curiosity rover used an image algorithm that was vulnerable? I didn't quite think of the Facebook application, so that's pretty cool. But I did think to myself, what if there's a library that's vulnerable that's in use today? So I started looking at all different kinds of libraries that were applicable to the Mars Curiosity rover, and I ended up finding one. There's a vulnerability in a software package that's a compression algorithm. The compression algorithm is called LZO. It also has another iteration of the compression algorithm called LZ4. These compression algorithms are used everywhere. It's the same as zip, gzip, bzip, or any other compression algorithm that you'd be familiar with, okay? It's just named something different as a slightly different algorithm. I found a vulnerability in the LZO algorithm, and I was able to gain memory corruption abusing the vulnerability. And what I found is that the Mars Curiosity team had been using the LZO compression algorithm to compress images. So whenever the Mars Curiosity rover takes a picture, because we're talking about the distance between Mars all the way down to Earth, the image has to be compressed in order for the radio communications information to be very small. So they compress an image with LZO, pass that information down to us, and we decompress that information and then look at the image. So there are one of two vectors of attack here. Either you can get them to upload a LZO compressed image that's compressed with a malicious algorithm up to the Curiosity rover, and the Curiosity rover will get code execution itself. Or if you understand the language, remember the language that I talked about, the communications language between the Curiosity rover and NASA, you might be able to spoof a message from the Curiosity rover to NASA And now you've tricked NASA into downloading an LZO compressed image that has a vulnerable payload in it, right? So either way, you're gaining compromise to the communications channel that Mars Curiosity rover works on. So using a real, practical, live vulnerability in LZO, it's theoretically possible to gain code execution on either side of the communications channel. And that's really what I think is the most amazing thing here, right? Because I only found one bug. And again, when I talked at the beginning of this, I was talking about components. You know, only one individual is needed to find a vulnerability in one component. But you can't break an entire component without breaking multiple links in the security chain. So one really important point I want to get across here is you cannot just compromise the Curiosity rover with that one vulnerability. There are so many other things that need to be done in order to achieve that code execution. It's not enough to say, I found a bug, I have therefore hacked this thing. That's not how it works. This isn't practical, it's not realistic, and it's not fair to the people that built that thing. But it's theoretically possible that you could, so you figure out, how do I make it practical? And that's the most important point that we can take away from this talk, is that as an organization of individuals interested in information security, we need to stop hand-waving over all of the abstract issues that are related in creating a practical vulnerability and making it exploitable. Okay? When you have a single bug, it takes a lot more to achieve a vulnerability or exploitation of that bug than just understanding that bug. In this particular example, yeah, I've got the LZO compression algorithm, but I also have to understand, how do I get messages to NASA? How do I get NASA to send images on my behalf? How do I communicate the messages from one point to the other point? How do I intercept messages if I have to be able to respond in order to get the communication to complete for them to download a message on either side? These are very complex issues that cannot be resolved simply. And the result is that I need multiple people to work with me. So I can't hand wave over all the other abstractions and say, what I did is really important because none of the other pieces in the chain matter. I have an exploit, that means I've hacked the Curiosity rover. That doesn't work. You have to be able to compromise every single link in the chain, which is so important today, right? Because the Mars Curiosity rover is just one piece of the puzzle. We have a much larger puzzle, which is the Internet of Things, right? Like the PLCs that are in a roller coaster, or this building, or the simple computer systems that are in our cars, Priuses, medical devices, everything else. If somebody tells you, I can hurt somebody tomorrow by hacking a pacemaker, right? It's a very disturbing thing. I don't like hearing that, and I don't think anybody in this room would like hearing that. But there are people out there that miscommunicate some of these issues and say, because I found a vulnerability in a pacemaker, we should all be worried about using pacemakers, or we should never use pacemakers, or pacemakers are worthless. That's not true. Because they're hand-waving over all the realistic issues, the practical issues, right? Just like the Mars Curiosity rover, if I was to say, yeah, I hacked it. No, I didn't hack the Mars Curiosity rover. I hacked a piece of what is used on the Mars Curiosity rover. Same thing with a pacemaker. If you find a bug in a pacemaker, you also have to be local to the individual that's using the pacemaker. You have to understand the wireless technology that's communicating the messages back and forth to it. You have to understand the encoded messages to be able to get some kind of thing triggered on the actual device. There are a lot of steps that are required. And in order to get a lot of people compromised, you have to be able to do that remotely in a very widespread way. It's not a simple thing to do. And there are a lot of people that will tell you different. So I think it's very important when you get started in information security to be able to understand the difference between somebody that's talking about a single point of vulnerability and somebody that's talking about a full compromise. The Mars Curiosity rover hack is a very small compromise. It's 1/1,000,000th of the actual components and software that is used on the Mars Curiosity rover, right? But RenderMan's ADS-B vulnerability an exploitation demo that's a real from point A to point B full compromise. He can send messages, he can receive messages, he can replay them, he can make things look like they can appear in different places. This is a very important distinction because as you grow your skill set in the information security scene, you're going to have to start assessing talks at DEF CON, at Black Hat, or other really important conferences. And some of the researchers don't necessarily have all the information. You unfortunately have people out there that are going to hype up a vulnerability because they want to get their name known, or they're going to hype up a vulnerability because they don't understand the practical implications of the vulnerability. And as an individual, you have to be able to discern the reality versus what you're being told, right? And this is just a part of the scientific process. So being able to understand the difference can be really easy in the context of the Internet of Things when you realize that there's only one piece of the puzzle. If you see somebody compromising only one piece of the puzzle, but they're claiming to do everything else at the same time, then you know right off the bat that this person is not telling you the full truth. Okay? And that's a really easy way for you as a researcher to say, I know better, maybe I can go further. And then you can be the other piece of that security puzzle. Maybe you can find the rest of the steps that make that particular vulnerability practical. Now you're taking research, maybe you even take my research from my little compression algorithm bug all the way to communicating with the Curiosity rover, which would be amazing, right? That would be excellent. But it's very important to understand the distinction between a single vulnerability and an entire compromise. And there's another compromise, or another concept that I want to bring up very quickly. Imagine a fence, a chain link fence, right? Everybody at school or at the playground or whatever has probably seen a chain link fence very recently, right? It's a very obvious concept. What's really important about a chain link fence, and it seems like a very simple thing, is the concept of a mesh of security, right? If you cut one link in a chain link fence, what do you get? Nothing, right? You haven't compromised the fence, you've compromised one link in a chain. You can't even put your hand through it without getting caught. You've really accomplished nothing. That's where we have to go in security today. Where we have to go with PLCs, with the Internet of Things. We've got so many complex systems, we have to create a mesh of security. So that one person finds one vulnerability, they have to do 50 other things to create a full compromise of that system. We are moving forward more and more today towards that design, towards that mindset. But most of the systems that exist out there today don't have a mesh of security. It's like a chain link, right? You've got a regular chain, like you would have for a bike, like a bike lock or something of that nature. If you cut with a bolt cutter one link in a chain, the chain's broken. It's useless. You can't use it anymore, right? This is the same concept that we've been using for the Internet of Things systems, PLCs, things of that nature. Which is why I was able to hack a car in 2011. Which is why I was able to hack assisted GPS devices in 2010. Which is why I was able to hack the global SS7 communication system in 2010. Because the legacy systems that we depend on every single day to control and communicate our information are built on the old style concept of a simple chain of security. Any link in that chain can be broken, and only one individual, it only takes one individual to break one link in a chain. As we move forward, as security engineers, InfoSec analysts, it's our job to communicate the concept of a security mesh, that chain link fence of security, to people that are developing our technology, publishing new technology, new software, new hardware releases, improving our cars, improving our houses, improving our families with new integrations of refrigerators and things of that nature, the more we see digital systems integrating to our physical life, the more we need a true mesh of security to ensure that one link can't compromise that fence that keeps us from the bad guys. Okay, so I hope you guys understand that, as it's probably the most important thing to me, theory-wise, as we move forward in 2014 and on in information security. So yeah, hacking Mars rover is a really exciting thing to me, right? Like, that's great stuff. Just to think that you affected software that's ran on another planet. And by all means, I hope everybody goes out today and looks a little bit more into the Mars Curiosity software, find out what's running on it. Maybe you'll be the next person to find a bug. That'd be amazing. But what's more important is understanding the models and asking ourselves, why are we continuously building systems that are reliant on a chain of security instead of a mesh of security? Forcing people to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of engineering time and money to break all of the links in a chain to compromise something like a mesh offense is far better, because it takes so much effort to do that that the attackers start dropping off. Whereas any one of us can be the person that breaks a single link in a chain. It doesn't take a lot of money, it doesn't take a lot of time. So, as we move forward, I hope this is something that everybody takes more advantage of. Not just us as information security professionals, but also everybody out there building, new tools and systems. It's extremely important. So I hope that everybody that's gaining information here at Roots can really start to relay that information to the people that they get their hardware and software from. Right? It's important to instill that concept at a young age. As you grow up, you're going to see a lot of systems that you're going to be concerned about, because you are going to immediately identify this problem when you see it. It's become very common for you. So yeah, I hope everybody out here tomorrow, or even today, takes a little bit out of their time to understand more about the Siemens PLCs. So please participate in the game. Go out there and search as many different systems as you can. You might even find that the Mars Curiosity rover uses a PLC or two, because it has to use a lot of different motorized components, a lot of different powering components. So it would be really great to see some research done on whether or not NASA is using these particular PLCs. So go out today, look at all the information on Siemens S7 PLCs, and let us know what you find, and tell us more about the systems that can be broken, are vulnerable, and need to be fixed. Because maybe you can participate in the fixing of those systems within the upcoming months. So again, I apologize for the slides, but really, the information is more important than the visuals. So thanks a lot for your time, and if there are any questions, shout them out. Thanks a lot.